Cave diving. A scary idea to most, but to some it's a thrilling pastime. Whether it be the adventure of exploring, or the physical and mental challenge, or the great community and the people you befriend along the way, the divers that choose to do it will tell you it's an experience like no other. But it's not all fun and games. Although it may be an amazing experience to some, there are always dangers lurking within diving. Dangers that leave very little room for mistakes, where even the slightest of miscalculations could mean the difference between you resurfacing to safety or you tragically taking your last breath floating below reach of any chance of survival. Today's story will be about how a group's innocent adventure to a beautiful cave turned into a nightmare gone horribly wrong. The cave's discovery is fascinating. It's honestly amazing that it was ever found to begin with. In 1938, in southern Australia, on a farm just a few kilometers from Mount Gambier, a farmer noticed one of his horses suddenly stumble when crossing a part of the field. When the farmer went to investigate why the horse was having trouble, they noticed a hole in the ground that was about a foot wide right where the horse had tripped. Looking through the hole, they could see that they had discovered something huge right underneath their feet. No other signs existed above ground to suggest such a massive cave could be hiding in plain sight. Imagine a long, flat, grassy field, but right below the ground lies a water-filled cave that's 407 feet deep. It's 460 feet long, and its width is 260 feet. If the horse or the farmer somehow fell through the hole, they would have fallen a whole 23 feet until they hit the water. And the top of the cave widens out like a triangle, so had anybody accidentally fallen in, they wouldn't have even had a way out. Over years and years, these types of underground caves are formed by certain types of rocks slowly dissolving away from heavy rainfall. The porous limestone that this cave was formed from created stunning internal structures, with beautiful clear water so you could see every detail. The cave eventually became famous with divers for its visual appeal. More than 3 decades later in 1973, on the 26th of May, a group of 9 divers departed to make their way to this huge underwater cave. By now, this cave was well known amongst divers, receiving the title, The Shaft. It's called The Shaft because of the small hold entrance, and the shape that's created by the light that funnels through it and into the deep water on a sunny day. Over the years, the hole had been widened to 3 feet for better access. Because of the 23-foot drop to the water, divers and equipment are lowered down to the water in several trips by a rope system similar to a pulley, attached to a metal structure directly above the hole. The day prior to the main dive, the group would lower themselves down into the hole to establish a shot line. A shot line is a rope attached to a float on the surface, which has a weight attached to the submerged other end so it keeps it in place. It's used for many things, but it's essentially a helpful safety precaution to aid divers in their decompression stops, and to act as a guide from the diving spot to the surface so you don't get lost along the way. Shot lines are good for safety, visibility, travel, and efficiency. And when it comes to diving, obviously you don't want to do anything too fast, but efficiency and accuracy is key to keeping everybody safe. There is a large pile of limestone roughly 130 feet below the sinkhole's entrance. This is called the rock pile, and it's where they established their shot line. They explored just around the edges of the rock pile for a short time before returning to the surface and finishing up for the day. The very next day, May 28th, they would all return to explore the cave even further. One diver would decide not to dive that day and stay at the top to help the team in other ways. Past the rock pile, there are 2 tunnels that extend downwards in different directions. One side reaches to a depth of 260 feet, and the other extending to 407 feet. Further access is blocked by rocks, and the extent of the cave's true size is unknown. One side of the sloping section of the chamber is called the Edge. It's a very narrow and dark section where the light from the shaft won't reach. Without another light, it's pitch black down there. They didn't plan exploring past the edge. The rock pile is considered to be the only real safe area of the dive, but even at that depth, they could have already been experiencing heavy signs of nitrogen narcosis. I assume most of you already know what nitrogen narcosis is, but let me briefly and quickly explain for those that are unaware. Nitrogen narcosis is something that happens to divers when they breathe in their gas mixtures past certain depths. Past certain pressures, it essentially becomes toxic to breathe. It affects your judgment, memory, and concentration, among many other things. It would basically feel like you were drunk underwater, but worse. And in extreme cases, you can even hallucinate. It's said to be pretty terrifying, and as a diver, you want to avoid it at all costs. So since they could have already been feeling the effects pretty heavily at the rock pile, anywhere below that depth would just be increasingly worse, until the effects would be extreme. The rest of the cave around and below the rock pile were either unexplored, pitch black, or covered with loose floating silt from the limestone, which would completely blind divers if they were stuck in it. Light or not, you wouldn't be able to see where you were going if you were stuck in it. If you explored to the deepest depths of this cave and you didn't have helium in your breathing mixture to dilute the gases, the effects of nitrogen narcosis would be extreme and unimaginable. They had never planned to dive that deep though. Unfortunately, they didn't plan as much as they should have. All 8 divers that went down that day ignored several key safety principles. To start off, the shot line didn't even reach the floor, so it could potentially move around from its intended spot. It also didn't have extra air tanks attached like it was supposed to have. They didn't calculate properly or plan out their gas mixture, gas amounts, or decompression times. They didn't organize for diving partners as a failsafe, which is very, very important. And they weren't exploring with a safety line either. This would assist in leading them back in case anything went wrong. For a while, they all explored, but at the edge of the rock pile, at a depth of 180 feet, Diver 1 was beginning to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis already. He signaled to everyone else that he would be making his way back to the top of the rock pile. Everybody signaled back that they would be exploring some more. Diver 1 stayed by the rock pile for about 8 minutes waiting for his friends to return. Diver 2 began making his way back up. He knew with the amount of air that he had that he was cutting it close. Before going back up, Diver 2 went to tap Diver 3 to let her know that there was no more time to keep diving, but she had swam away before he was able to notify her. Divers 1 and 2 resurfaced at the same time to see that Diver 4 had already finished his dive. 30 seconds later, Diver 5 would pop their head out of the water, and Diver 5 had barely any air left in their tank when they surfaced. Aware of how low their oxygen would have been and how serious the situation had become, Diver 2 got an extra air tank and went back into the water as quickly as he could to look for the other 4 divers. At around 225 feet, he got to the edge of the underwater cliff and found Diver 6's light and camera, but Diver 6 was nowhere to be seen. When he looked up, all he could see ahead was tons of silt floating around in the water, making it impossible to see or navigate any further into the cave. There was nothing he could do, and he had to resurface. Diver 5 went back down as well to try to find them, but nobody was found and there was nothing they could do. The 4 other divers were gone, and they never resurfaced alive. The 4 surviving divers would state that they saw Diver 3 and Diver 7 attempting to get back to the rock pile as quickly as they could. In their panic, they swam directly upwards instead of following the slanted rock that they had initially descended down. They thought they were swimming up towards safety, but unknowingly they were actually swimming up into a dome-like structure in the ceiling that didn't have an exit. Diver 4 would say that before he had surfaced, he saw them in the distance and they looked frightened. Diver 3 and Diver 7 had low visibility due to the silt, low oxygen, and they drowned trying to escape the dome they had mistakenly swam into, while most likely also experiencing a nitrogen narcosis-induced panic. One other survivor would say that he saw someone swimming with lots of effort further down into the cave, swimming towards a dead end where there was no exit. The person he saw was Diver number 8, and at that depth he was probably suffering from the more extreme symptoms of nitrogen narcosis, and in his severely disoriented state was sadly unable to understand that he was actually swimming to his own demise. Many recovery dives were made over the following year. Some were failures, some were successful. But every dive seemed to bring on more challenges than the last, and it was an extremely difficult recovery operation. January 23rd, 1974, Diver 6, the one who had lost their light and camera by the edge of the cliff, was found at a depth of only 50 feet, floating under a ledge against the ceiling. March 9th, 1974, Diver 3 and Diver 7 were found together at a depth of 185 feet, and Diver 8 was first seen 20 feet lower. It would take until April 9th, 1974 for the last body to be recovered. To really put in perspective the extent of the unwelcome environment that these divers were faced with, and why everything needs to go perfectly according to plan, the recovery operation to retrieve the bodies took almost an entire year since the incident happened to complete successfully. Diving can be an amazing and fun pastime, but if things go wrong, it can be absolutely terrifying. That's going to be it for today. Hopefully you found it interesting. Hopefully you learned something. But before you all go, I just want to give a big shout out and a thank you to DiveDB for allowing me to use the shaft footage. They have a website called divedb.net that will be posted in the description. They take tons of photos on their dives. There's tons of wildlife pictures to look at and crazy beautiful sights to see. If you have time, go check them out. It's seriously amazing what they do. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I hope you have a good rest of your day or night depending on where you are. Until next time, take care.